You are very welcome to do so after the official party lay their wreaths. We are indeed fortunate once again to have students from Ellenbrook Secondary College with us this evening to lead the singing of the Australian National Anthem. As mentioned, gentlemen in civilian attire, please remove your headdress. Those in uniform, please salute. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand, if you will, for the National Anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free, with golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is good by sea, our land abounds in nature's gifts, our beauty rich and rare. In history's page, let every state once Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Please be seated. A short history of the State War Memorial and the Flame of Remembrance, which is in front of you. The State War Memorial was designed by the Honorary Architect, Lieutenant General Sir J. Talbot Hobbs, and since its dedication in 1929, the State War Memorial has been entrusted to the State Branch of the Returned and Services League. The internal walls of the Undercroft list the names of more than 7,000 service members killed in action or who died of wounds or illness in World War I and post-World War II. Bronze plaques on the outside walls of the Undercroft list the names of nearly 4,000 West Australians who lost their lives in World War II. This court of contemplation commemorates the conflicts in which West Australians have fallen, with the walls featuring the names of major battles. The Flame of Remembrance within the pool of reflection was indeed inaugurated by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on the 1st of April 2000 and burns continuously. It symbolises the promise of all Western Australians. We will remember them. Tonight, our story will be about the Battle of Alamein and Kokoda. On completion, you will hear the piper musician Davina Goldthorpe play the traditional lament, Flowers of the Forest, as the wreaths are laid. Our bugler today is Corporal Matthew Creek from the Australian Army Band, Perth. Ladies and gentlemen, I now call on Brigadier Retired Duncan Warren, AM, RFD, to read tonight's Roll of Honour stories. Brigadier Warren.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we commemorate 5 Western Australians who gave their life in 2 major battles in 1942, El Alamein in Egypt and much closer to hand, Kokoda in New Guinea. These battles, together with Midway, Milne Bay, Guadalcanal and Stalingrad, had by late 1942 changed the balance of the war in the Allies' favour. You'll notice that we have 5 people we are commemorating tonight, which means our service will be a little longer than usual, but I believe that's little sacrifice from us when you consider the sacrifice they made on our behalf. The majority of Western Australians up against the Germans and Italian adversaries in Alamein served in the 9th Division. There's 2nd 28th and 2nd 32nd Infantry Battalions and the 2nd 7th Field Regiment Royal Australian Artillery, whilst in New Guinea it was the 7th Division 2nd 16th Battalion up against the well-trained Japanese. The Alamein battles were fought in very clear, lightly undulating stony desert, in stark contrast to the very rugged close jungle of New Guinea. Kokoda is recognised as one of the most significant campaigns of the Second World War, to Australians in both a physical and a symbolic sense. Officially called the Kokoda Trail, I'd have to admit that I'd find it hard not to call it track rather than trail, so forgive me if I do so. The campaign consisted of a series of battles fought between July and November 1942 between Japanese and Allied, primarily Australian forces, in what was then the Australian territory of Papua. Physically, some of the most desperate and vicious fighting was encountered on the Kokoda Track as the Japanese sought to capture Port Moresby. Victory on the Kokoda Track ensured the security of the Allied bases in Northern Australia. Symbolically, when Australians think of the Second World War, the word Kokoda looms large, as similarly Australians think of the landing at Gallipoli in the First World War. There are so many amazing anecdotes from each of these campaigns, and we're honoured to have veterans from both campaigns here with us today, together with family members of those being specifically remembered here. This afternoon, remember 5 soldiers. From the Alamein battles, which took place from July to November 1942, there are Bombardier William John de Ralph Granville Edwards, Lance Sergeant Maurice Pluckett. From Kokoda, fought over the period July to September, Warrant Officer Class 2 Thomas Sidney Foy and Captain Breton Douglas Normal Langridge. I've been able to bring together differing amounts of information for each of these men, but be assured that the quality of information or the quantity of information available has no bearing on the contribution each man made on our behalf. WX3667 Bombardier William Edwards was born at Cottesloe on the 23rd of January 1903. He had 7 brothers, one of whom was adopted. Of his brothers, 4 served in World War I, 2 of whom were killed in action, 1 was severely wounded in action, and the 4th, joining up before his 16th birthday, later became General Allenby's bugler in Damascus. 2 others were skilled tradesmen and man-powered out in the Second World War, and the 7th served the Pacific Theatre in World War II. Glennie, as he was known, was educated at Scotch College where his father coached rowing. He worked as a toolmaker at the Midland Railway workshops and was married to Irene. He enlisted at Claremont on the 30th of May 1940 at the age of 37, joining the 7th Field Regiment. Sent to the Middle East as part of the 9th Division, the regiment was sent to Mersa-Matruh, where it finally received its 25-pounder guns, and then further west between Sidi Barrani and Halfar Pass, close to the Egyptian-Libyan border. He was promoted to Bombardier on the 10th of November 1941, and he was an artificer, a skilled tradesman whose task was to maintain the guns. Following withdrawal of the Australians from Tobruk, the 7th Field Regiment spent time in Cairo, then to Zama in Syria. In June 1942, the division was rushed to the Alamein box. It was at Alamein that he was killed in action on the 26th of August 1942. WX7249, Lance Sergeant Maurice Plunkett, was born at Hoffman on the 15th of July 1901. Following schooling, he became a farmhand. He married Barbara Farnsworth in 1923 and lived in the Lake Grace area. Maurice Plunkett became a policeman in 1928, and the family moved to Malawa and to Kanama. Maury joined the army from Leverton on the 1st of August 1940 at 39 years of age with a family of 5 children. He sailed to the Middle East with the 2nd 28th Battalion and progressed through the ranks to be promoted to Lance Sergeant on the 30th of October 1941. No doubt because of his policing experience, his record shows that he was detached for duty to the 9th Army Field Punishment Centre during the period between Tobruk and Alamein. He rejoined the 2nd 28th on the 3rd of April 1942. The next entry documents in his document state missing in action and transferred to X list on the 27th of August 1942. The 31st of August entry states now reported killed in action 27th of July 1942, and then it was buried El Alamein, Egypt, and giving the map details. The 26th, 27th July was the night of the battalion's attack on Ruin Ridge. Despite many setbacks as they breached the minefield, the battalion did capture its objective, However, the proposed breakout by British tanks didn't occur, and the tanks that did appear were German. There was another battalion waiting in reserve, but it was not ordered forward as there was no hope of retaining the position. The 2nd 28th were cut off and very low on ammunition. The message received at brigade headquarters from the battalion was as follows: at 0905 hours, we are in trouble. At 0942 hours, we need reinforcements. At 0943 hours, there are tanks all around us. At 0944 hours, you'd better hurry, rock the artillery in. At 10:03 hours, we have got to give in. 10:04 hours, VA, 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 and no further messages. The current president of the 2nd 28th Battalion and 24th Anti-Tank Company Association, 99-year-old J.J. Wade, remembers Maury Plunkett, no doubt due to his age and experience as a farmer and policeman, who's known as a father figure to many of the younger diggers in the battalion. WX 12189, Private Edgar James Harley, 2nd 16th Battalion. Ted, as he was known, was born in North Fremantle in January 1904. He was the only son of Kokoda Trail and Frederick Charles Harley. Two younger sisters were born, Alice in 1906, who lived for just one day, and Sylvia in 1907. By 1910, Frederick had deserted Kokoda and their two young children. Destitute and faced with few options, Kokoda went to domestic service, and on the 4th of May placed her children in the Parkerville Orphanage for Boys and Girls, run by sisters Kate Clutterbuck and Jane Ashdown. There were nearly 100 children at Parkerville at the time, with around 2/3 privately subsidised, like Ted and Sylvie. They were generally schooled and cared for until they reached the age of 14. Ted therefore spent the better part of his next 9 years at Parkerville, where he also worked the land to earn his keep. At Parkerville, he was instilled with the self-discipline, tidiness, immaculate good manners, pride in his appearance, and strong sense of order he retained for the rest of his life. The Parkerville files note that in February 1919, Ted went into public service at the Tender Board and was then living in Hay Street, West Perth, with his mother. He had succeeded in getting back on his feet and was not only running a West Perth port, succeeded in getting back on her feet, was not only running a West Perth boarding house, but managed the cabin tea rooms nearby. Over the next few years, Ted worked hard and supported his mother and then his sister when she returned home at 14. For the rest of their lives, none of them ever told anyone they had been at Parkerville. In 1929, 19-year-old Rose Ellen Pratley of Wannamal and East Perth applied to work at the tea rooms. Kokoda was so impressed with the young girl, she introduced her to Ted, who took her out to the pictures. He was soon as smitten with her as she was with him, but Rose's father would not allow her to marry before she turned 21. Soon after Rose's 21st birthday, on Valentine's Day 1931, she and Ted were married. Their first child, Thelma, was born later that same year. Rose and Ted had 3 more children, neatly spaced over the next 5 years: Norman, Ronald and Sylvia, and later moved to Mount Lawley. Ted proved a devoted husband and a loving father. His older children recall his sense of humour and capability in all things, including darning his own socks. He never raised his voice in anger, and unfailingly polite, insisted on good manners, that faces and hands be washed and hair combed before sitting down to dinner, promptly at dinner hour. He was always clean-shaven and hair neatly brushed. When he went out, he was immaculate, trousers sharply creased, hat brushed, shoes polished. On the 2nd of May 1941, Ted, then 37, enlisted at Claremont. After training, he embarked to the Middle East from Fremantle on the 9th of September and was taken on strength to the 2nd 32nd Battalion on the 30th of December 1941. It wasn't long before Ted's immaculate neatness, ingrained sense of order and discipline came to the fore, and he became the well-regarded batman for Warrant Officer Peter Lawson. The two men became very close. On the 19th of July 1942, Ted and Peter were near Alamein, a small railway station town on the Egyptian coast. They'd been in action for nearly 3 weeks in what would become known as the First Battle of Alamein. That day, the battalion diary records withering shell fire resulting in heavy losses. 21 men killed in action, 80 wounded and 170 missing. The next day was comparatively quiet, with light sporadic shelling. The diary continues, this evening, while members of the battalion headquarters were drawing a meal from the tucker truck, a shell landed amongst them and wounded 11 men. Another shell of the same salvo killed the RSL's batman. Back home in Mount Lawley, Rose was mourning the loss of her mother, Ellen, who had succumbed to a stroke in early June. But she and the children were looking forward to her sister Doreen's wedding on the 1st of August. 11-year-old Thelma was the flower girl and remembers her hair in curls and pretty blue dress that she wore. She and her brother Ron remember sitting outside as a boy approached, knocked on the door and delivered a telegram to Rose. It is with deep regret, it said, that I have to inform you that Private Edgar James Harley has been killed in action on the 20th of July 1942 and desire to convey to you the profound sympathy of the Minister for the Army. Rose slid into deep shock. That night, Ted's mothers joined them in their shared misery. Thelma, with surreal clarity, still remembers watching Coretta the stove stirring soup while tears slid down her cheeks. A few days later, Rose received a sincere and direct letter of condolence from Lieutenant Colonel David Whitehead. I feel there is so little that I can say, but I do want you to know that every member of the battalion and myself feel for you. He was liked and respected by the many who knew him well. His cheerfulness under all conditions was a wonderful example to many a younger man. It may help a little to know that there are many who will mourn the loss of a fine friend and comrade. The next letter was from Peter Lawson, who wrote, when the call came for more ammunition, Ted and myself went forward with a load under heavy shell fire, and as he stepped from the truck, he was killed instantly, suffering no agony whatsoever. He reassured Rose Ted was laid to rest with full military honours, saying, he often yarned to me about his home life and the children look forward to seeing you all after this cursed war. And I hope, if God spares me, that I may be allowed to pay you a visit, as I hail from the west myself. Peter's visit never eventuated, but he was killed in action on the Second Battle of Alamein in just 3 months later, on the 31st of October 1942. He lies in the same cemetery not far from Ted's. Rose arranged just 2 words on Ted's gravestone, treasured memories. She never really recovered from the shock of losing him. She never remarried and outlived him by nearly half a century, dying in 1991, aged 81. The treasured memories he gave her and his family are what they still hold dear. Now turn to the 2nd 16th Battalion and the Kokoda campaign. We commemorate Warrant Officer Class 2 Thomas Foy and Captain Brett Langridge. Both died a short time apart in the same action, but in different companies. The Japanese were very effective outflanking the Australian defenders on their fighting withdrawal back along the Kokoda Trail. It was at what had become known as Brigade Hill between Ofogi and Minari that a battle was fought there over 3 days of September 1942. As besieged Australians desperately fought to hold the advancing Japanese as far north of Port Moresby as possible. The Battle of Brigade Hill and subsequent withdrawal cost the Australians 60 men killed and 2 more dying of wounds. Bill Graydon, a platoon commander of the 2nd 16th Battalion, should be telling the story, but he is away in, I believe, Ireland at the moment, unfortunately. Bill James's book, Field Guide to the Kokoda Track, states, Bill Graydon led a small, lightly armed reconnaissance patrol to verify the size and nature of the Japanese intrusion. Before their final ascent up the side of the saddle, the patrol spread out an extended line, parallel to the track. Warrant Officer Tommy Foy had only been attached to Bill's platoon a few days previously. On approaching the crest of the ridge, a single shot rang out, fired from no more than 8 to 10 yards. Tommy Foy, who was looking straight up, was hit in the throat. He was killed instantly. It was in this same battle that Captain Brett Langridge was also killed. Having been ordered to attack through the Japanese, Bill James writes, on receiving the order, and believing it had no chance of success, Langridge took his playbook from his shirt pocket and handed it to David Pilot Thompson. Lieutenant Louis Lambert, leading 18 platoon, was also to take part in the attack. He too realised the futility and took out his prized tin of tobacco and threw it to David. Minutes later, having faced the inevitable, Langridge, Lambert, Edward Donovan and Edgar Matthews lay dead beside the track. Captain H.D. Stewart, the battalion's medical officer, wrote of Langridge, Lefty, as he was known, himself stopped a fusillade of bullets. In spite of a mortal chest wound, he continued to encourage his hard-pressed men. In the finest tradition of an infantry officer, he led from the front, faced the same dangers as his men, and gave them inspiration as much as leadership. Next to Padre Fred, Lefty was my closest friend in the battalion. A humble and happy man, he would rebuke me when in fits of pique I would rail against the army. Once I said I regretted not having joined the Navy, and forever after he addressed me as Admiral. WX5059, Warrant Officer Class 2, Thomas William Foy, was born in Lancashire, England in 1901 to Ellen and Thomas Foy, and became very proficient in his future life in soccer, hockey and rifle shooting. He joined the Divisional Signals Indian Army, providing 6 years' service before returning to England, where he decided to go to Australia and seek a better future for himself. Arriving in Western Australia in 1927, Thomas worked as a farmhand at Lake Grace and met and married Letitia Williams in 1931. They had 2 daughters, Helen in 1937 and Jacqueline in 1939. Meanwhile, the family moved to Narrogin, where Thomas took up as a fitter with Narrogin locomotives. His sporting prowess earned him many a mention in the local papers. In 1938, with war looming, he joined the local 25th Light Horse Regiment as a member of B Squadron and was promoted to corporal. At the advent of hostilities, he transferred to the 2nd 16th Battalion, 7th Division AIF. The division fought in the Middle East, and by the time Thomas was a Warrant Officer Class 2, they moved to the jungles of New Guinea to help protect Australia. Warrant Officer Class 2 Thomas Sidney Foy is buried in the Bamana War Cemetery, Port Moresby. He was aged 40. WX 1599 Captain Brett Langridge, Brett and Norman Douglas Langridge, known as Lefty in the 2nd 16th, killed in action 8th of September 1942, mentioned in dispatches. Brett was born in Perth on the 10th of February 1919 in North Perth and grew up in Inglewood. The son of an English father and Australian-born mother. He had 3 little sisters who looked up to him, Joan, Wendy and Lorelei. Brett's mother died suddenly of pneumonia when Brett was only 12 years old and antibiotics had not yet been discovered. Brett was a good student and a keen sportsman. He attended Perth Modern School, where he was a prefect. He was in the cricket team and hockey team. After school, he worked in the Commonwealth Bank. When war loomed, Brett joined the 16th Battalion Cameron Highlanders and trained at Northern and Rottnest. From this, the 2nd 16th Battalion was formed in April 1940. Brett embarked for the Middle East in 1940 to the 2nd 16th Battalion, and whilst there was promoted to captain. The battalion was called back to Australia in 1941 to defend the country from possible invasion by Japan. Calling into Fremantle on the way east, he was able to briefly meet with his family and announce his engagement to Betty Detman, the VAD from the Dalkeith Detachment overseas, whom he had met in Cairo. The 2nd 16th then trained for Queensland, where they trained for action in New Guinea, then embarked to defend the New Guinea from invasion. Brett's father woke in his bed in Inglewood in the middle of the night when Brett was killed and received the telegram soon afterwards to confirm his fears. Brett's family adored him and his father died within 2 years of this. Brett's family received letters from Brett's commanding officer, Albert Currow, fellow company commander Frank Sublett, Brigadier Arnold Potts, and General Thomas Blamey, amongst others. In a letter to Brett's father, Lieutenant Colonel Albert Currow, commanding officer 2nd 16th Battalion, wrote that he had recommended Brett for a military cross for his bravery in action. and I quote, "Brett was one of the unit's outstanding officers, and I had recommended him for the Military Cross for his bravery in action. Unfortunately, this decoration cannot be awarded posthumously, and the only recognition he can now receive is a mention in dispatches. It is a poor recompense for his deeds, but his example will live long and never be forgotten by members of this unit." We are honoured to have family members of each of these men that we are remembering here with us tonight. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Stand fast. Ladies and gentlemen, the official guests this evening for laying of the wreaths and floral tributes will now lay those tributes at the pool of reflection in front of you. The first wreath, on behalf of the family of Bombardier William Edwards, will be laid by Mr. Michael Edwards and his granddaughters Sophie and Isabel. On behalf of the family of Warrant Officer Class 2, Thomas Sidney Foy, Ms. Ellen Anderson Knight. On behalf of the family of Private Edgar James Harley, Ms. Thelma Rose Harley, Mr. Reece Harley and Sylvie Watson. On behalf of the family of Captain Breton Langridge, Mr. Ian Kerr. On behalf of the 2nd 16th Battalion AIF Association, Mr. David Baker. And on behalf of the 2nd 28th Battalion and 24th Anti-Tank Company Association, Brigadier Retired Duncan Warren, AM, RFD. I now invite and encourage anyone here who wishes to lay a floral tribute to do so now. Thank you for that. The ode this evening will be recited by Peter Kennedy. Lieutenant Peter Kennedy, after enlistment and training, was sent to the Middle East and served in the Australian 9th Division of the victorious 8th Army, led by General Montgomery. Lieutenant Kennedy was wounded in action and after recovery went back into action, serving throughout the rest of the war. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand for the ode, the last post, followed by a minute's silence.
They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds unencountered. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Please be seated. The flags are now lowered and the sub-wardens are about to dismount their posts. Continue.
I couldn't see him.
Ladies and gentlemen, would like to thank Deputy Warden Colonel Jeff Simpson and the sub-wardens for their participation in tonight's service. Thanks also to members of the West Australian Great War Living History Association who provided the Guard of Honour. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that concludes the service for this evening. We leave you with reflection on the words inscribed on the front of the State War Memorial behind me. Inscribed on it is erected by grateful citizens in the remembrance of this state who, at the call of duty, gave their lives for freedom and humanity. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we wish you a very pleasant evening. Thank you for coming.